My name is Ingrid Myers. I'm 33 years old. The morning I walked into that courtroom by myself, my mother-in-law Nancy was already there with a confident smile on her face. She sat across the aisle in a sharp black blazer and a string of pearls, her lawyer right beside her in a neat gray suit. My sister-in-law Paige sat behind them, legs crossed, chin high, nodding as if victory was already theirs. I carried just one item, a leather briefcase my husband Grant had given me for my 31st birthday. It felt heavier than it looked. 6 months of careful silence had gone into that bag. 6 months of receipts, reports, sworn statements, and one surprising document that no one else in the room knew about. What none of them realized, not Nancy, not Paige, not their lawyer in his fancy tie, was what waited inside that folder and what the judge would soon reveal. Welcome back to my channel. This is the place where family drama meets quiet justice. Where the underdog stays calm, skips the shouting and begging, and simply shows up ready. If you've ever been brushed aside by someone who thought you were weak, this story will hit close to home. Drop a comment and subscribe if you want more. Let me take you back. Grant and I bought our house the same year we got married. It was a simple 2-bedroom ranch with vinyl siding, a chain-link fence, and a dogwood tree on a quiet street in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Nothing fancy. Grant planted that tree our first spring there because he said every home needed at least one living thing that didn't pay rent. He worked as a self-employed plumber, up every morning at 5:30, Old Spice on his neck and steel-toed boots by the door. I'd hear his van leave the driveway before the sun rose above the trees. I worked as a paralegal for 7 years at Jenkins and Whitmore, a small estate planning firm on Princess Anne Street. I wrote wills, filed probate papers, and organized trust files. I knew Virginia probate law the way Grant knew copper pipes, by touch, by heart, by daily practice. We weren't wealthy. We had a mortgage, a savings account we filled a little each month, and a life insurance policy Grant bought when we married. We also had a will. We made it together 4 years earlier at my boss Margaret Whitmore's desk. She watched us sign it, everything to each other. Simple and clear, just like the ones I helped clients create every day. Grant's family lived close by. His mother Nancy stayed 25 minutes south in Stafford. His sister Paige was in Richmond, about 90 minutes east. His uncle Dale, Grant's dad's brother, lived up in Culpeper, 45 minutes north. We saw them at Thanksgiving and sometimes Easter. Nancy was always polite to me, but in a cool, distant way, like a bank teller finishing a quick transaction. Paige had borrowed money from Grant 3 times and never paid it back. Grant died on a Tuesday in September. I was at my desk working on a trust change when Margaret's phone rang. She answered, looked straight at me, and said my name in a soft, careful tone I'd never heard before. A truck had run a red light on Route 3 while Grant drove to a job in King George. They said he was gone before the paramedics even got there. I drove to the hospital anyway. I sat in a plastic chair in a hallway that smelled of floor cleaner and held his wedding ring, which a nurse had placed in a small envelope. The solid ground of my life vanished that day. I didn't fall apart right there, but I had to keep moving forward on nothing. So I did. I called the funeral home. I called the insurance company. I told Grant's clients, emailed our friends, set up the service, picked the casket, and chose the hymns. If I stopped moving, I would stop working altogether. That was the deal I made with myself, and I stuck to it. Nancy came to the house that same evening. She sat at our kitchen table and cried real tears. I held her hand because she had lost her son, and that pain was honest. She had raised Grant by herself after his father walked out when Grant was 12, moved to Florida, and never called again. Nancy had supported him through braces, baseball, and trade school on a pharmacy manager's salary. She truly loved Grant. I never doubted that. What I questioned later was what that love gave her the right to claim. The funeral took place on a Saturday. White Lilies, Grant's favorite Creedence Clearwater song, and a church he hadn't visited in years but where his grandmother's name was on a brass plaque near the door. I handled everything because that's what I do, responsible Ingrid turning pain into a list of tasks, Nancy sat in the front pew holding Paige's hand. When the pastor asked family to speak, Nancy stood up right away. She spoke for 6 minutes. I know because I kept glancing at the clock on the back wall, needing something steady to focus on. She shared stories about raising Grant alone, the sacrifices she made, the small apartment they shared, and the double shifts at CVS so he could have baseball cleats. She never mentioned me once, not my name, not our marriage, not the 7 years we built together. I told myself it was just grief playing tricks on her. After the service, Paige pulled me aside near the coat closet. Her perfume smelled strong and flowery. "You should let Mom handle Grant's accounts for now," she said. "You're grieving and not thinking straight." I looked at her. Paige had never kept a steady job for long and owed more on credit cards than most people owe on a car. "Thanks for the offer," I replied, "but I'll handle it." She pressed her lips tight, holding back whatever she had planned to say next. At the reception, Dale shook my hand too firmly and avoided my eyes. On the drive home, I replayed those 3 moments, Nancy's speech, Paige's suggestion, Dale's handshake, and felt something sharp beneath the sadness, like a hidden paper cut. 2 weeks after the funeral, Nancy began visiting the house often. She said she wanted to help sort Grant's belongings. At first I let her. She folded his shirts, packed his boots, and wrapped his fishing rods. Then I noticed her real pattern. She wasn't only sorting, she was hunting. She checked drawers, flipped through folders, and searched the filing cabinet twice. I watched from the hallway as she dug through old tax papers like she was chasing something specific. "Looking for anything in particular?" I asked. She stayed calm. "Just memories, dear." Her voice stayed soft, but her eyes drifted. I heard her heels click on the kitchen floor as she moved on, hard, steady steps like a clock ticking to someone else's rhythm. That sound soon meant Nancy to me, not comfort, but someone marking her ground. What I didn't know then was what Nancy did when she wasn't at my house. She called Grant's Aunt Judith, his old trade school roommate, and our next-door neighbors. She told them I had changed the locks and refused her visits. She said I was acting strange and pushing away Grant's real family. None of it was true. I hadn't changed any locks or shut anyone out. But Nancy knew something I was too tired to notice: whoever shapes the story often wins. She had started writing her version the day we buried Grant. 1 month after the funeral, Dale called and said we needed to meet about Grant's estate. Just simple matters, he claimed. I drove to Nancy's house in Stafford. The 3 of them sat at her dining table like a judging panel: Nancy, Paige, and Dale. Dale slid a document toward me. It was a typed will, signed and dated 2 months before Grant died. I read it once, then again. It left the house and savings to Nancy. The life insurance went to Paige and Dale. I would get only personal belongings. 7 years of marriage packed into a cardboard box. Nancy folded her hands. Her voice stayed calm and almost kind. Grant would have wanted his family to have it. I studied the signature. I didn't gasp or tremble, but something inside me turned cold and steady. The signature was off. I had watched Grant sign papers for 7 years: checks, invoices, permits, our mortgage. His capital G always had a special counterclockwise loop. This one looped the other way. The pressure looked too smooth, like it was traced. And the date? Grant had been in Roanoke that week, 3 hours away, working on sewer lines. He wasn't even home. "May I have a copy?" I asked. Dale nodded. The original was already filed with the court. I took the copy, said goodnight, and drove home. My hand shook on the wheel, not from fear, but from the clear anger of someone who handles these cases every day and now held a fake document. That night, I sat at the kitchen table under the bright light with the copy spread out. I grabbed a legal pad from my work bag and listed 3 clear points. First, the signature was traced, the pressure stayed too even, too heavy at the ends, with signs of a pencil sketch underneath. Second, the date didn't match. "And you know I can't represent you, it's a conflict." She was right. But she gave me the name of Dr. Ellen Sears, a forensic document expert with 47 court appearances. Then she added, "Ingrid, you write these petitions every day. You know how to file and proceed." I did know. I returned to Nancy's house 3 days later. I asked about the 2 witnesses on the will, their names, how Grant knew them, and when they signed. Nancy stood in her doorway and didn't ask me inside. "They were old friends from his younger days," she said. "Before your time." I had been part of Grant's life for 10 years, 3 dating, 7 married. I knew everyone from his parties, co-workers, and poker nights. These names didn't fit anywhere. I told her I would contest the will. She didn't seem surprised. Her reply came out cool and even. "You came without a lawyer. You've already lost." That line hit hard, not because it hurt, but because it showed her full plan. She had already hired help, filed the will, and mapped everything out while I was still picking flowers for Grant's casket. Paige stepped up behind Nancy, arms crossed. "Just accept it, Ingrid. Don't make this messier than it has to be." I looked at both of them, mother and daughter standing together in a doorway where I once carried Thanksgiving pie. "I'm not making it messy," I said. "I'm just asking questions." I drove home, 25 minutes on I-95 South, hands at 10 and 2, radio off. In the silence, I let the arithmetic settle. She'd hired a lawyer. She'd filed first. She'd been planning this since before the dirt on Grant's grave had settled, and she thought I'd fold because I was alone. The next Monday, I filed a will contest with the Stafford County Circuit Court. I typed the petition myself on my lunch break using the same template I use for clients at work. Grounds, forgery, and fraud, supported by the respondent's professional experience in estate documentation. Filing fee, $275. I paid it with my debit card. That same week, I started building my evidence file. I went to the bank and pulled 7 years of mortgage statements, every payment made from our joint account, every check signed by me, every automatic withdrawal I'd set up because Grant always forgot the 15th of the month. I gathered the utility bills, the homeowner's insurance, the property tax receipts, all in my name or in both our names. I photographed Grant's signature on 22 separate documents. Invoices from his plumbing business, our home purchase agreement, tax returns, the building permits he'd pulled for bathroom renovations. 6 of those signatures were clear enough for comparison. I packaged them in a manila envelope and sent them to Dr. Ellen Sears by certified mail along with a photocopy of the contested will. Her retainer was $3,200. I wrote the check that evening sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd identified the forgery a week before. By day, I processed other people's estate files at Jenkins and Whitmore, trusts, probate petitions, beneficiary designations. By night, I built my own case. The manila folder sat on the passenger seat of my car every morning. It went into my desk drawer at work, came home with me at 5:30, and sat on the kitchen counter while I ate dinner alone. It was getting thicker. The isolation started slowly, then all at once. Grant's Aunt Judith, a woman who'd hugged me at every holiday for 7 years, called one evening with a voice full of rehearsed concern. "Ingrid, honey, is it true you changed the locks and won't let Nancy visit?" I hadn't changed any locks. I told her so. She paused. "Well, Nancy said." "Nancy said something that isn't true," I said. The silence on the other end had a texture to it, like she was deciding which story to believe and finding mine less convenient. Tommy, Grant's closest friend, an electrician who'd been best man at our wedding, sent me a text. "Hey, I'm hearing things. I don't know what to believe." I wrote back with the facts, kept it short. He read the message, didn't respond for 3 days. That was when I understood the shape of what Nancy had built. She hadn't just filed a will. She'd filed a version of reality. One where I was the outsider, the grief-stricken woman making irrational decisions, the daughter-in-law who didn't deserve what Grant left behind. And she'd seeded it everywhere. Phone calls, Facebook messages, parking lot conversations after church. I started keeping a log. Dates, names, what was said, by whom, not recordings. I didn't need recordings. I needed a paper trail, the kind that holds up under cross-examination. The manila folder grew another quarter in. I ate dinner alone every night. Microwaved soup, crackers, sometimes just coffee. I slept on my side of the bed. The house was quieter than it had ever been. But quiet isn't the same as empty. Quiet was where I was building. Paige showed up at my house on a Thursday afternoon without calling first. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, which told me either she'd been crying or she wanted me to think she had. "I need to pick up some family things," she said, stepping past me before I could respond. She went straight for the living room, pointed at the painting above the fireplace, a landscape Grant had bought at an art fair on our 5th anniversary. "That was Grandma Caldwell's," she said. It wasn't. I'd watched Grant pay $65 for it from a woman selling watercolors out of her minivan. "It wasn't," I said. She pointed at the silver flat ear set in the hutch. "That's definitely family silver. It was a wedding gift from my parents' Paige." She spun around. The sunglasses came off. Her eyes were red, but not from sadness. "You don't get to keep everything just because you married him." "I'm not keeping everything," I said. "I'm keeping what's mine." That's when she said it. The line I still hear when the house gets too quiet and my mind wanders back to this stretch of my life. "Blood is blood, sweetheart. You were just renting the name." She said it. The way people say things they've been saving. Practiced, loaded, aimed for the ribs. I stood at the front door, held it open, and kept my voice flat. "I think you should leave." She left, slammed her car door hard enough that the neighbor's dog started barking. I closed my front door, leaned my back against it, closed my eyes. In my left hand, I was holding a mortgage receipt from that morning. 1847, I'd paid it. Same as every month. I wasn't renting anything. Dale was quieter than the women. He didn't confront. He maneuvered. The first thing I noticed was the padlock. Grant had a storage shed behind the house. Corrugated metal, no insulation, full of business records, old invoices, a filing cabinet with copies of every contract he'd ever signed. I went out one morning to pull his permits and found a new combination lock on the door. I hadn't put it there. I called Dale. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Oh, yeah. I secured that as part of estate management," he said. Casual as changing a tire. "As executive, I have a fiduciary responsibility to protect estate assets." Fiduciary responsibility. Dale ran a construction company that was bleeding money. He'd lost 2 contracts the previous year and was behind on payments to his subcontractors. That's the man lecturing me about fiduciary duty. A week later, I discovered he'd sent a letter to our bank. On letterhead, he must have had printed identifying himself as executive and requesting a hold on Grant's sole proprietorship account. The bank complied. Then I checked our joint savings. Frozen. I called the bank, spoke to a manager named Linda, and cited Virginia Code Section 64.2 to 38. Joint tenure with right of survivorship is not a probate asset. It transfers automatically to the surviving co-owner. Linda said, "Ma'am, we received a letter from the estate's executive. We need to verify. The account is titled joint with right of survivorship." I said it passes outside probate. The executive has no authority over it. Linda promised a review within 5 business days. I wrote down her full name, the date, the time, and the reference number she gave me. The manila folder was getting heavy. 5 days later, the bank called. Linda, same manager. Slightly warmer this time. "Ms. Myers, we reviewed the account. You're correct. The joint account passes to you as surviving co-owner. The hold has been removed." I transferred enough to cover Dr. Sears's retainer that afternoon. $3,200 wired from the account my husband and I had built together over 7 years of direct deposits and discipline. While I was reviewing the statements, I found something else. A withdrawal of $2,800 from Grant's sole proprietorship account, his business account, in his name only. The withdrawal was dated 3 weeks after his death. The authorization letter attached to it bore Dale's name and the word executor. The problem was simple. The will naming Dale as executed by the court yet. He had no legal authority to access that account. I printed the statement, highlighted the withdrawal, filed it under a new tab in the manila folder. That evening, I packaged 6 of Grant's clearest signatures from tax returns, the home purchase agreement, an invoice from a kitchen remodel he'd done in Pennsylvania, and sent them to Dr. Sears via priority mail. Then I sat on the edge of the bed. The house was dark except for the hallway light. On the bathroom shelf, Grant's bottle of Old Spice sat exactly where he'd left it, half full, cap crooked because he never screwed it tight. I picked it up, held it near my face, closed my eyes. The scent was fading. Everything was fading except the case. The case was getting sharper every day. You know that feeling when someone tells you that you can't do something and every bone in your body knows they're wrong? That was me every single morning when I drove to work with that manila folder on the passenger seat. If you've ever had to prove yourself to people who already decided you didn't matter, stay with me. The part you've been waiting for is coming. 6 weeks after I sent the samples, Dr. Sears called. I have preliminary findings, she said. Can you come in? Her office was in an industrial park off Route 1, a plain brick building with a small plaque by the door that read SE's Forensic Document Services. Inside it looked like a cross between a dentist's office and a crime lab. Magnifying equipment, UV light boxes, a desktop scanner the size of a small refrigerator. She sat me down across from her desk and opened a binder with plastic sleeves. Each sleeve holding a high-resolution enlargement of Grant's signature. The signature on the question document is not consistent with the known exemplars, she said. She pointed to the enlargements. Look here. The pen pressure through the middle strokes is too uniform. In a natural signature, pressure varies. It's lighter on upstrokes, heavier on downstrokes. This signature maintains consistent pressure throughout, which is characteristic of tracing. She flipped to an overlay. The question signature layered over a known one, adjusted for scale. The slant angle differs by approximately 12 degrees from every exemplar. And here she pointed to the base of the G. There are graphite traces beneath the ink. Someone sketched the signature in pencil first, then traced over it in ink. She closed the binder. In my professional opinion, this signature was not produced by the same hand that produced the exemplars. I asked how many times she'd testified in court. 47, she said. The formal report would take 2 more weeks. I held the preliminary findings on my lap during the drive home. My hands were steady. The folder on the passenger seat was almost full. That weekend, I remembered something Grant had said during one of those late-night kitchen conversations that married people have, the kind where you're both too tired to go to bed and too comfortable to move. He'd mentioned a safety deposit box at First National on Caroline Street. Just in case, he'd said. You know where the key is. I hadn't thought about it since, but now I tore through the hall closet looking for his winter coat. The heavy canvas one he wore hunting, the one I'd pushed to the back of the rod because the sleeve still smelled like Old Spice and would smoke, and I couldn't look at it without losing my breath. The key was in the inside pocket, small brass, attached to a paper tag with a number written in Grant's handwriting. At the bank, I presented my driver's license, our marriage certificate, and Grant's death certificate. The manager led me to the vault. The box was small, maybe 5 by 10 inches. Inside, our original will, 4 years old, signed by Grant in that unmistakable counterclockwise G witnessed by Tommy Hale and Margaret Whitmore. Everything to each other, and beneath the will, a single sheet of notebook paper folded once. Grant's handwriting. Messy, slanting, right? The kind of penmanship that made substitute teachers wheeze. Ingrid, if you're reading this, I hope it's just because you're organizing again. But if something happened to me, you already know what to do. I trust you more than anyone. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 11 minutes. I know because the dashboard clock was the only thing I could focus on. I held that piece of notebook paper against my chest and cried for the first time since the funeral. Grant had already told the world who his family was. He'd written it down, signed it, locked it in a steel box, and trusted me to find it. Nancy could say whatever she wanted. Grant had already answered. By mid-December, I had a case file that would make any attorney in my office proud. Tab 1, the contested will annotated with the 3 red flags I'd identified the night I first saw it. Tab 2, Dr. Sears's preliminary report. Tab 3, the original will from the safety deposit box signed by Grant, witnessed by Tommy Hale and Margaret Whitmore. Tab 4, 7 years of mortgage statements, utility bills, property tax receipts, and home insurance documents. All paid by me or by our joint account. Tab 5, the bank statement showing Dale's unauthorized withdrawal of $2,800 from Grant's sole proprietorship account. Tab 6, would hold drive Sears's formal report when it arrived. I called Tommy. He picked up on the second ring this time. The 3-day silence from before had apparently ended when he heard I was contesting the will. Tell me what you need, he said. I needed his sworn statement confirming he'd witnessed Grant's signature on the original will 4 years ago, and that he'd never signed any other will for Grant. Tommy came to my kitchen table that Saturday, signed an affidavit I'd prepared, and drank 2 cups of black coffee while telling me stories about Grant that made us both laugh for the first time in months. Margaret Whitmore prepared her own affidavit confirming the same. She'd witnessed Grant's execution of the original will in her office. 2 witnesses, both credible, both willing to testify under oath. I organized everything into the manila folder, now upgraded to Grant's leather briefcase because the folder couldn't hold it all anymore. I created a tabbed index. I numbered every exhibit. I was not a woman falling apart. I was a paralegal building a case. The way I'd been trained to build them. And it was nearly ready. NY's lawyer made the first move in January. His name was Richard Hartwell. Mid-50s, practiced out of an office in Woodbridge, handled mostly real estate closings and traffic violations. Estate litigation wasn't his specialty, which told me Nancy had hired him because he was cheap or because he was a friend or both. Hartwell sent me a letter offering settlement. The terms. I keep Grant's personal belongings and receive $15,000. Nancy gets the house, the savings, and the insurance payout. $15,000, our savings account alone held $63,000. The house was worth $225,000 with the equity we'd built. The life insurance was $200,000. They were offering me pocket change to walk away from everything Grant and I had built together. I responded by email. Brief, professional, and copied to the court file. The respondent declines the settlement offer and intends to proceed with the will contest as filed. That night, Paige called at 10 o'clock. She sounded like she'd been drinking. You're going to lose everything and look stupid doing it. She said. I said good night, Paige. And ended the call. The next morning, Dale tried. His voice had that uncle knows best warmth. The kind Grant used to roll his eyes at. Ingrid, this doesn't need to go to court. Lawyers are expensive. Think about it. I don't have a lawyer, Dale. I'm representing myself. The line went quiet. Then he said, that's your choice. And hung up. I knew exactly what their settlement offer meant. It meant they weren't confident. A forged document holds up only as long as nobody looks too closely. They were hoping I wouldn't look. They were counting on me being alone, overwhelmed, and too grief-broken to fight. They were wrong on every count. Dr. Sears's final report arrived in the first week of February, a 22-page document with 6 appendices of photographic evidence. I read it sitting in my living room with the briefcase open on the coffee table, the late afternoon light coming through the window where Grant's dogwood tree was still bare from winter. The conclusion was on page 4. The questioned signature on the document dated August 3 does not represent a genuine signature of the purported testator Grant Allen Myers. The signature was produced through the process of tracing as evidenced by 1. Subsurface graphite deposits consistent with pencil underdrawing. 2. Uniform pen pressure inconsistent with natural handwriting dynamics. 3. A 12-degree slant deviation from all 6 known exemplars. 4. Reversed stroke direction in the uppercase G, contradicting the testator's established habitual pattern. The appendices included side-by-side enlargements at 400 magnification, pressure map analyses, and overlay comparisons that made the forgery look almost comically obvious once you knew what to look for. I slid the report into the last tab of the briefcase. Every section was full now, 7 tabs, every piece of evidence indexed, cross-referenced, and ready to present in the order I'd rehearsed. I looked out the window. The dogwood hadn't budded yet, but the branches were darker than they had been in December. Sap rising, life moving upward through wood that looked dead from the outside. The court date was in 3 weeks. I'd already written my opening statement. I'd already scheduled my witnesses. I'd already filed my exhibit list with the court clerk, including a copy of Dr. Sears's report to opposing counsel 10 days before trial, exactly as the rules required. I was ready, and the only person who knew just how ready was me. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing the way I imagined surgeons prepare, obsessively, methodically, imagining every possible complication and building a response for each one. I wrote and rewrote my opening statement until I could deliver it from memory. I organized my witnesses. Dr. Sears first to establish the forensic foundation. Tommy second to authenticate the original will. Margaret's affidavit filed as documentary evidence. I practiced in front of the bathroom mirror, then in front of the living room couch, then over Zoom with Margaret, who sat in her home office and listened like a judge. "Slower on the forensic section," she said. "Let the evidence breathe. Don't rush the overlay comparisons. The judge needs time to see what you're showing her." I adjusted, practiced again. Again. I bought a navy suit at the outlet mall off Route 3. The first new piece of clothing I'd purchased since Grant died. Standing in the fitting room, I looked at myself in the 3-way mirror and realized something. Every action I'd taken for 6 months had been reactive, responding to NY's moves, countering Dale's maneuvers, absorbing Paige's attacks. The suit was the first thing I'd done purely for myself, not for defense, not for survival, for the version of myself I intended to be when I walked into that courtroom. I pressed it that night and hung it on the back of the bedroom door. I transferred Grant's briefcase from the kitchen table to the entryway bench where I could grab it on the way out the door. Everything had a place. Everything was accounted for. The only variable left was whether the judge would see what I could see. That the document Nancy filed was a lie and that Grant's actual wishes were locked in a steel box he'd trusted me to find. The night before the hearing, Paige sent a text at 9:14. I was brushing my teeth. My phone buzzed on the bathroom counter and I read it in the mirror's reflection. "Mom says, you're going in alone tomorrow. You already lost before you walked in." The laughing emoji, the certainty, the echo of what Nancy had said 3 months earlier in her doorway. The same line recycled by her daughter like a family heirloom of contempt. I put the phone down, did not respond. I rinsed, dried my face, and walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, stood at the counter in the dark, drinking it slowly. At 9:40, Nancy called. Her voice had that particular softness she deployed when she wanted something warm on the surface. Calculation underneath. "Ingrid, it's not too late to settle. I don't want to embarrass you in front of a judge." "I appreciate the call, Nancy. See you tomorrow." I hung up, sat on the edge of the bed, opened the briefcase one last time. Tab 1, their will. Tab 7. Dr. Sears's report. In between, 6 months of evidence that told the truth Nancy had been trying to bury. I closed the briefcase, set it on the floor beside my nightstand, turned off the lamp, and for the first time in 5 months, I slept through the night. No dreams, no waking at 3 in the morning with my heart hammering against the mattress. Just 8 hours of the deep, clean sleep that comes when you know exactly what you're going to do and exactly how you're going to do it. My alarm went off at 6. I showered. I dressed. I picked up the briefcase and I drove to the courthouse. That text from Paige, the laughing emoji, the certainty that I'd crumble. I saved it, not as evidence, just as a reminder of what it feels like when someone counts you out before the first word is spoken. If you've ever been that person, the one nobody expects to fight back, keep watching. I got to the Stafford County Courthouse at 7:40, parked in the second row, sat in my car for 3 minutes with my hands on the briefcase, feeling the weight of it, the leather warm under my palms. Then I walked in. The hallway was long, marble floors, fluorescent lights, the kind of institutional architecture that makes everyone look slightly smaller than they are. My low heels clicked evenly on the tile. I carried the briefcase in my right hand. No one walked beside me. Outside courtroom B, I saw them. Nancy stood near the water fountain in a black blazer with pearls. The same pearls I noticed that I'd bought her for Christmas 3 years ago. She was speaking quietly to a man in a gray suit carrying a Mont Blanc briefcase. Richard Hartwell. He was nodding at something Nancy said, his chin doing that slow, reassuring dip that lawyers use when they're managing a client's expectations. Paige sat on a wooden bench against the wall, legs crossed, scrolling her phone. She looked up when she heard my heels, glanced at me, then at the empty space behind me. No lawyer, no paralegal, no advocate, nobody, and turned away with a smile. The smile wasn't cruel exactly. It was satisfied. It said, "This is going to be easy." Nancy looked me over. Her eyes moved from my face to the briefcase to the empty hallway behind me. And she smiled, too. A small, careful smile, the kind you'd give someone who's brought a knife to a situation that clearly calls for something larger. I didn't smile back. I walked past them, opened the courtroom door, and chose a seat at the respondent's table. I set the briefcase on the table, unclasped it, and waited. The courtroom was smaller than people imagine. No jury box. Probate cases in Virginia are bench trials decided by the judge alone. One American flag, one Virginia flag, a raised bench of dark wood, and 2 counsel tables separated by an aisle wide enough for one person. The court reporter set up her machine. A clerk arranged files. 2 strangers sat in the gallery waiting for a different case. The Honorable Patricia Okafor entered at 9 sharp. She was a compact woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a manner that suggested she'd heard every variety of human greed and had run out of patience for embellishment. She called our case. Hartwell stood first. His opening was polished. "Your Honor, Grant Allen Myers executed a valid will 2 months prior to his death, properly signed and witnessed. The decedent's widow is contesting out of grief and confusion, which, while understandable, does not constitute legal grounds to invalidate a properly executed document. We ask the court to uphold the will as filed." Grief and confusion. I let that sit for a moment. Then I stood. "Your Honor, I'm not confused. I'm a paralegal with 7 years' experience in estate planning at a firm that handles probate litigation. The will submitted by the petitioner is a forgery and I have the evidence to prove it." The room got quieter. Hartwell's pen stopped moving. Nancy sat a little straighter. Before the judge responded, I caught something. A small private moment. Nancy had opened her wallet in her lap. Inside was a photograph. Grant is a boy, maybe 8 years old, holding a fish on a dock somewhere. NY's thumb rested on the edge of the picture. Her eyes were wet. She snapped the wallet shut when she felt me looking. Her grief was real, but it didn't justify what she'd done. I began with the financial evidence. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A." I handed copies to the court clerk to Hartwell and kept one for myself. 7 years of mortgage statements, every monthly payment of $1,847 drawn from our joint checking account, signed or auto-drafted under my authorization, 84 consecutive payments. I paid every mortgage installment on the property that the petitioners will claims I have no right to, I said. Judge Okafor adjusted her glasses and reviewed the top page. Continue. Exhibit B, utility bills, homeowners insurance declarations, property tax receipts. All addressed to Ingrid Myers or Ingrid and Grant Myers. Exhibit C. The bank statement showing Dale Caldwell's withdrawal of $2,800 from Grant's sole proprietorship account authorized by a letter identifying Dale as executive, a designation that at the time of withdrawal had not been validated by any court. Your Honor, Mr. Caldwell withdrew funds from the Deedon's business account using an unvalidated executive designation. That account is a sole proprietorship asset. His authorization letter had no legal standing at the time of the withdrawal. Hartwell was writing notes faster now. Short scratchy strokes, the handwriting of a man recalculating. I stood still, hands at my sides, voice at the same volume I use when I present evidence summaries at my office. Conversational, precise, unhurried. Judge Okafor made a note, looked up. Is there additional evidence, Ms. Myers? Yes, Your Honor. Quite a bit more. I called Tommy Hale to the stand. He wore a button-down shirt tucked into clean jeans, the dressiest I'd ever seen him, and I could tell the collar was bothering him by the way he kept running a finger under it. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down with the careful posture of a man who respects a courtroom but would rather be anywhere else. Mr. Hale, I said, did you witness Grant Allen Myers sign a will approximately 4 years ago? Yes, ma'am. At the office of Margaret Whitmore on Princess Anne Street. Grant asked me to come in. We sat at a conference table. He signed the will. I signed as a witness. Mrs. Whitmore signed as the second witness. Did you witness Grant sign any other will at any time? No. Are you familiar with the names listed as witnesses on the will submitted by the petitioner? He looked at the document I handed him, shook his head. Never heard of either one of them. And Grant and I talked every couple weeks. He'd have mentioned something like signing a new will. Hartwell stood for cross-examination. Mr. Hale, how close would you say you are to the respondent? Tommy looked at him steady. I was close to Grant. Grant trusted Ingrid with everything he had. That's good enough for me. I presented Exhibit D, the original will from the safety deposit box. Grant's signature, the real one with the counterclockwise G I could have drawn from memory. Tommy's name. Margaret Whitmore's name. Everything to each other. Judge Okafor held both wills side by side, one in each hand, and studied them without expression. I thought of what Paige had said. Blood is blood, sweetheart. You were just renting the name. Grant hadn't thought so. Grant had put it in writing. Your Honor, I'd like to call my final witness. I paused, let the sentence settle. Dr. Ellen Sears, Forensic Document Examiner. Hartwell had been leaning back in his chair with one arm draped over the side, the posture of a man who thinks the hardest part is over. When I said Dr. Sears's name, he reached for the file on his table and flipped to a section near the back. I watched his face as he read. He'd received my exhibit list and a copy of the report 10 days ago, exactly as required by the rules of discovery. He'd had the report in his possession for over a week, but watching his eyes move across the pages, I could see it. The slow physical process of a man reading something carefully for the first time. The color drained from his face the way water drains from a sink. Gradually, then all at once from the edges. He leaned toward Nancy and whispered something. Nancy shook her head once hard. Paige in the gallery behind them stopped scrolling her phone. Hartwell's mouth formed words I couldn't hear, but I could read one phrase from the shape of his lips and the way his hand pressed flat against the report. Wait, this can't be right. Dr. Sears entered through the side door. She was 59, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal blazer and glasses with thin wire frames. She carried a binder the same size as the one she'd shown me in her office. She had testified 47 times. This was 48. She took the stand, stated her name and qualifications, and settled in with the quiet confidence of a professional who has no interest in drama, but absolute certainty in her findings. Judge Okafor nodded. You may proceed. Dr. Sears opened her binder and addressed the court the way a professor addresses a lecture hall, clear, measured, and entirely uninterested in whether her audience found the material convenient. I examined the question signature on the document dated August 3 of last year. She said, I compared it against 6 known exemplars of Mr. Myers's genuine signature collected from tax returns, a home purchase agreement, business invoices, and building permits spanning a 4-year period. She turned to the first enlargement, a side-by-side at 400 magnification. Finding 1, pen pressure. A natural signature exhibits pressure variation. Lighter on upstrokes, heavier on downstrokes. The question signature maintains near uniform pressure throughout the middle strokes, which is characteristic of tracing rather than natural handwriting. She moved to the overlay. Finding 2, slant angle. The question signature deviates 12 degrees from the consistent slant present in all 6 exemplars. Habitual slant is one of the most stable features of an individual's handwriting. A 12-degree deviation is significant. The next page showed microscopic enlargements of the G, finding 3 stroke direction. In all 6 exemplars, Mr. Myers formed the uppercase G with a counterclockwise initial loop. The question signature uses a clockwise loop. A person can copy the general shape of a letter. They rarely reverse their own habitual stroke direction when doing so, and they never reverse someone else's without evidence of conscious reproduction. Final enlargement. Finding 4 subsurface graphite deposits. Beneath the ink of the question signature, there are traces of pencil graphite consistent with an underdrawing. Someone sketched the signature in pencil before tracing over it in ink. She closed her binder. In my professional opinion, the signature on the question document was not produced by Grant Allen Myers. It was produced through tracing by another individual. NY's heels did not click. She sat motionless. I noticed it because the absence of that sound, which had followed me through this entire ordeal, felt like a shift in gravity. Hartwell rose for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket, which is what lawyers do when they need an extra second to think. Dr. Sears, isn't it possible that the testator simply signed in a hurry? Perhaps under time pressure. Doctor didn't blink. Haste affects slant angle and letter size. It does not produce graphite traces beneath ink. Hartwell tried again. Could environmental conditions, temperature, humidity, the writing surface, account for the variations you described? Environmental conditions do not reverse habitual stroke direction. He looked at his notepad, looked at the judge, sat down. No further questions. I stood. Your Honor, I have one additional exhibit. I handed copies to the clerk and to Hartwell. Exhibit E, a printout of the D-Dent Google Calendar for the week of August 3 through August 7. I pointed to the relevant entries. During the dates the petitioner claims this will was signed. Grant Myers was in Roanoke, Virginia, approximately 180 m from his home in Fredericksburg. He was there for a commercial plumbing job. His client's name and address are listed in the calendar entries. The D-Dent was not at home. He could not have signed this document on the date indicated. Judge Okafor looked at the calendar printout, then at the contested will. Then at Nancy. The briefcase on my table was empty now. Everything was on the judge's bench. 7 tabs of evidence spread across the dark wood. The manila folder I'd started building in October. The one that had written on my passenger seat every morning for 5 months. The one that grew from a few pages to an inch to 2 into a weight I could feel in my shoulder when I carried it. It had done its job. NY's hands were folded on the table, knuckles white. Paige had stopped scrolling. She sat rigid in the gallery, staring straight ahead at nothing. Dale looked at the floor. Judge Okafor turned to Nancy. Mrs. Caldwell, do you wish to testify regarding the origin of this document? Nancy stood. She smoothed her blazer. She began in a voice that was almost composed, the voice of a woman who had spent 61 years keeping herself upright through worse than this. That was Grant's final wish. She said, he told me himself. He said he wanted his mother taken care of. He said it more than once. I waited. Then I spoke calm, professional. The same tone I use when I cite case law for clients who are about to lose everything and need to understand why. Your Honor, if the petitioner claims the decedent communicated his wishes verbally, I would note that Virginia Code Section 64.2 to 4003 requires a will to be in writing and signed by the testator. Oral declarations are not admissible to establish or alter testamentary intent in this jurisdiction. NY's composure cracked. Not gradually. All at once, like a windshield hit by a rock. She's lying. She pointed at me, her arm fully extended, her finger shaking. That's my son's house. I raised him alone for 23 years. I sacrificed everything. My career, my marriage, my life, so he could have something. And she walks in here after 7 years and takes it all. Judge Okafor picked up her gavel, struck at once. Mrs. Caldwell, sit down. Nancy sat. She was trembling. Paige stood up in the gallery, took one step toward the aisle, then stopped, frozen between fight and flight. She chose flight. I heard the courtroom door close behind her. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I stood at my table, hands resting on the edge, and waited for the judge to speak. Judge Okafor reviewed her notes. She looked at the 2 wills, one on her left, one on her right. She looked at Dr. Sears's report. She looked at the calendar printout. She removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. The courtroom was silent except for the court reporter machine, which had stopped because nobody was speaking. 30 seconds, maybe 40. The longest silence of my life. The court finds by clear and convincing evidence that the signature on the document submitted by the petitioner is not genuine. 1 sentence. That was all it took. She continued, the will filed by Nancy Caldwell on behalf of the estate of Grant Allen Myers is hereby declared void. The court recognizes the prior valid will executed approximately 4 years before the decedent's death, properly witnessed and authenticated by 2 credible witnesses. Under that instrument, the decedent's estate passes in its entirety to his surviving spouse, Ingrid Myers. She paused. Additionally, the court is referring the matter of the fraudulent document to the Stafford County Commonwealth's attorney for consideration of criminal investigation, including but not limited to charges of forgery and fraud upon the court. Nancy slumped in her chair. Not dramatically, the way a building settles when something structural gives way. Dale sat behind her, white as the legal pad he wasn't writing on. Paige was already gone. Hartwell gathered his files, closed his briefcase, and stood. As he passed my table on the way to the door, he paused. Nodded once, small, tight, almost imperceptible. The nod of a man acknowledging that he'd underestimated someone and knows it. I picked up Grant's briefcase. It was lighter than it had been in months. And I walked out of the courtroom. Tommy was waiting in the hallway. He stood up from the bench when he saw me, shoved his hands in his pockets, and smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from anyone who cared about Grant in a long time. He would have been proud, Tommy said. He would have been annoyed I didn't hire a real lawyer, I said. Tommy laughed. I smiled. It was the first time I'd smiled in this entire story, and it felt foreign and fragile, like using a muscle that had gone months without work. We walked out together. The February air was sharp and clean. I stood on the courthouse steps and looked at the parking lot, the bare trees, the gray sky. It was over. In the weeks that followed, the pieces fell where gravity took them. The Commonwealth's attorney opened a preliminary investigation into the forged document. Dale retained his own attorney, separate from Nancy now, because their interests had diverged the moment the word criminal entered the conversation. The $2,800 he'd withdrawn was flagged for repayment. Paige stopped calling, stopped texting. I heard through Tommy that she'd moved back to Richmond and wasn't speaking to Nancy. Whether that was shame or strategy, I didn't know and didn't ask. Nancy, I don't know what happened to Nancy. I didn't reach out. She didn't reach out. Some doors close quietly. And you realize later that you don't have the energy or the desire to open them again. I drove home that afternoon, parked in the driveway, and sat on the front porch with Grant's briefcase beside me. I opened it. The only thing left inside was the piece of notebook paper from the safety deposit box, his handwriting, his trust. I didn't rent anything. I built it. Every mortgage payment, every late night filing, every morning, I woke up next to him and chose this life. It was mine. It had always been mine. Silence doesn't mean you've accepted defeat. Sometimes it means you're building a case so solid that when you finally speak, the only sound in the room is the other side's confidence hitting the floor. That's my story. 6 months of silence, one manila folder, and a judge who only needed one sentence. If this story reminded you that preparation is its own kind of power, share it with someone who needs to hear that. And if you've ever had to stand alone in a room full of people who counted you out, I'd love to hear your story.